The Concordat, when Rome shook hands with the Reich. When most people think about World War II, they picture Hitler, armies, and political leaders, but rarely the role of the Church. This story looks at Pope Pius XII and how the Vatican's choices before and during the war helped shape what happened in Germany. By following his decisions, you can see how religious power, fear of communism, and silence in the face of evil came together at one of history's darkest moments. Big question: was Pope Pius XII, Eugenio Pacelli, morally complicit with Hitler and the Nazis before and during World War II? Historian John Cornwell had access to Vatican archives and argues that Pius XII failed morally, chose church power over justice, and helped create conditions that made Nazi rule stronger. Who was Pacelli/Pius XII? Eugenio Pacelli later became Pope Pius XII in 1939, just before World War II. As a Vatican diplomat and then Secretary of State, he was deeply involved in German politics long before becoming Pope. His main goal: centralize power in Rome and bring all Catholics under tighter papal control, even if that meant sacrificing democratic Catholic institutions. The deal with Hitler. The 1933 Concordat. In early 1930s Germany, there were about 23 million Catholics, powerful Catholic universities, newspapers, and a strong Catholic political party, the Center Party. Pacelli saw these as too independent. He wanted them controlled directly by the Vatican, not by local democratic forces. Before Hitler, several Catholic chancellors resisted Vatican pressure, seeing it as authoritarian. When Hitler became chancellor in January 1933, he welcomed a deal. The Vatican and Nazi Germany signed a Concordat, a treaty, in 1933. The Vatican got formal recognition and control over German Catholics. In return, it effectively pulled Catholics out of politics. Key consequences: the Catholic Center Party, under Vatican encouragement, voted for Hitler's Enabling Act, which gave him dictatorial powers. Afterward, the Center Party disbanded with Vatican approval. Many Catholics, suddenly without a political home, drifted into supporting or joining the Nazi Party. Hitler used the Concordat as propaganda, claiming it as Vatican approval of his regime. Pacelli was angry at this interpretation, but still celebrated the Concordat as a victory for church authority. Pacelli's priorities and moral blindness. Cornwell's main charge. Pacelli consistently put church power, centralization, and anti-communism above human rights and moral protest. He feared democracy, seeing it as a path to socialism and communism. He was willing to weaken Catholic democracy in Germany if it strengthened papal control. Cornwell says Pacelli later tried to rewrite history, claiming he had been forced into the Concordat, like at gunpoint. This, he argues, shows self-deception and refusal to face the real consequences of his choices. Evidence of anti-Semitism. During the 1919 to 1920 Bolshevik uprising in Munich, Pacelli wrote about Jews using harsh, stereotypical, and demeaning language. He described them as physically repulsive and morally suspect. This is one main documented piece of evidence suggesting he shared common anti-Semitic attitudes of his time, similar in tone to language found in Nazi ideology. While it is only one major passage, Cornwell believes it reveals a deeper prejudice in Pacelli's worldview. Pius XII and the Holocaust. Once Pacelli became Pope Pius XII in 1939. By the early 1940s, he knew about the Nazi program of extermination. He was not totally silent, but what he said was extremely limited. In his Christmas message of 1942, he referred vaguely to hundreds of thousands of victims, but never named Jews or the full scale of the genocide. The statement was so cautious and vague that, in Cornwell's view, it effectively minimized or even trivialized the Holocaust. Defenders argue a strong public denunciation would have made things worse and saved no lives. Cornwell responds, if that was his reasoning, the Vatican never clearly explained it at the time, and after the war, Pius XII falsely claimed to have spoken clearly and forcefully. The Vatican's political strategy and silence. The Concordat included an understanding that the Vatican would not openly attack the Nazi regime in exchange for the ability to maintain religious structures. Reports from German bishops and others made clear to the Vatican that concentration camps and mass killings were happening. Some bishops in Germany held pro-Hitler ceremonies, and churches sometimes aligned themselves publicly with the regime, while the Vatican leadership remained formally silent. Individual priests and nuns were persecuted and killed, but the higher church hierarchy stayed relatively protected and relatively quiet. There are also unconfirmed rumors such as claims that Pius XII may have had a requiem mass said for Hitler, which add to the controversy around his legacy, even if they are not solidly proven. Beatification and the politics of sainthood. Under Pope John Paul II, the process of declaring saints became more politically charged. Beatifying Pius XII would not just honor a man, it would indirectly endorse his wartime approach, strong papal power, centralization, and strategic silence. Cornwell stresses that the Pope as an individual is not the same as the Church as a whole, and that criticizing Pius XII is not the same as condemning all Catholics. The book, Hitler's Pope. John Cornwell's Hitler's Pope is built on research in the Vatican archives. The first half explains the history and structures of the Church that shaped Pacelli's thinking. The second half traces how his actions and silence as Pius XII intersected with Hitler's rise and the Holocaust. Cornwell concludes that Pius XII was a monumental moral failure who helped enable Nazi power and failed to speak clearly for the Jews. Legacy of Pius XII. Pius XII died in 1958. Stories describe him as emotionally isolated, eating alone with only a pet canary, suggesting a lonely, withdrawn personality in his final years. Some traditionalists praise him as the last true pope because of his strict anti-modern views, including suspicion toward ideas like Darwinian evolution. After the war, there were efforts inside the Vatican to remove or investigate bishops who had been openly pro-Nazi, showing a late attempt at internal correction. Still, his close dealings with Nazi Germany and his weak public response to the Holocaust leave a lasting stain on his reputation. Why this matters for understanding church and state. This story shows how the desire to protect religious power can lead to compromise with evil political systems. How fear of communism and love of hierarchy help some church leaders overlook or downplay racism, dictatorship, and genocide. How silence, especially from powerful religious institutions, can legitimize injustice rather than restrain it.